Hello, everyone, and welcome to Out of Nowhere. It's a brand new show. This show's been going for quite a while. I used to be on Beacon of Light Radio quite a few years ago, and then Blog Talk Radio. So, been doing radio for about 10 years now. I can remember when I first started out on them on Blog Talk Radio. It was frightening at that time when you first start out, and all them years I've done, must have done over 1,000 shows with different guests talking about different subjects. So it's going quite nice. My guest today is Simeon Hine, Dr. Simeon Hine, should I say. He's a former university professor, statistics and research methods. He came across the idea of remote viewing in 1996 and took a class of step 6 to results of training were surprisingly positive and convinced Simeon there is a large area scientific knowledge. Can we please welcome Simeon to the show? Hello there.
Hey, Bob. Thanks for having me here today. Appreciate it.
That's good, yeah. What got you into all this stuff then? You know, UFOs, Bigfoot, and various other things.
No, it's a good question. It's actually something I ask myself every day. Um, it started, I think, with the UFO sighting in the Everglades with my mom. She was a bird watcher. And we did see something that was really large and round and greenish with solid structure in it that to this day I cannot identify what it could have been because it went from a stationary position hovering above us a couple miles up below the clouds, as big as a full moon, to your eye,
Mm.
that size on the horizon, but above. And it it went from being completely stationary, but when we put our binocs on it, started to accelerate into a cloud and disappeared in a cloud. Which I'm 12 at the time, so I don't know what these things are, but my mom said, Sim, we saw a UFO. And we even went to the ranger talk that night, which they do in these national parks in the US, as you might be aware. And the ranger would not, my mom tried to bring it up as soon as the talk started because the ranger asked, what did people see today out there? And the ranger would not go there. She wouldn't talk about it. My mom persisted after the talk. And I could see my mom was very frustrated attempting to have a conversation with this federal government official about something both of us had seen and the people on the bench next to us had seen. So she said to me, Sim, that's when they zapped you. That's how you got interested in all these topics. So maybe, Bob, that's when it started. Uh, it was always at the back of my mind, but it wasn't something I really pursued very much. I think I got interested in these subjects again in 1996, having taken a remote viewing class for an 8-day class, and in Atlanta, Georgia. And it was someone that had learned the techniques from a person in the military viewing program. It became declassified in 1995. I'm sure all our viewers here, they've heard of remote viewing,
Yeah.
the ability to perceive things at a distance without using your physical senses. So it came up again because it was sort of natural to view these anomalous UFO targets, since remote viewing can give you accurate information potentially about things that you can't normally get information about. There were also people that showed up at the classes later on in the year when I had become an instructor there, having studied it for several months, who had worked at NASA and told us about the reality of the UFO situation. So I think that's how I kind of link it together. Apart from coming across a few books as a teenager, Mothman Prophecies, John Keel, and then that excellent book, Above Top Secret by Timothy Good. Somehow along the way, that ended up on my bookshelf in the 80s. It must have been because I was at the University of Arizona, which had a big astrophysics program. And I think it was in the bookstore. And I think somehow I bought it. So that's how I got involved in these subjects, Bob. And as you know, one subject leads to the next, leads to the next.
Of course it
If you're
does.
open minded. Yeah.
How did, what made you get into crop circles as well then?
No, that's a good question. I mean, that came out of uh, that that came out of RV, and I wrote about it in Opening Minds. One of the targets that we were given in RV class was this triple Julia set. I mean, it was a remote viewing target, Bob. So I just became,
Right.
I didn't know what these were in 1996. I had been in school for 27 years from kindergarten to PhD. I never heard of the word crop circles, but it was a target in the advanced RV class. And I was curious when we finished the session. I had gotten some interesting readings during the session. I mean, information that didn't quite make sense to me. So I thought I'd go over there and look at them. And I did in 97. And that's when I saw that there really were anomalies around crop circles, electromagnetic anomalies, people's sense of having missing time, sometimes UFO sightings and so forth in the Wiltshire area, by the
Yeah.
Marlborough, Wiltshire area. Yep.
What did you think? Do you think there's lots of energy around them then?
I think there are non-ordinary electromagnetic fields because our equipment would go on the fritz quite a bit. I saw this the first summer I was there. I mean, I went back there summer after summer, and eventually the person that was running these tours, Ron Russell, turned the tours over to me, and I started giving them myself starting in 2006. He had just been doing it for 20 years, and uh, yeah, about 12 years, he decided he had enough of doing it. But during those years, I saw so many camera and equipment failures and strange phenomena, and it carried over into even the man-made circles. Eventually, we met people who made these circles. We didn't believe it at first, but they made demonstration circles for us. I mean, it's something I wrote
What
about
did,
in Opening Minds.
I'm going
And
to say, what did you think about these? What made these circles then? Did they
well,
look really good as well?
I mean, originally they were, as Terence Meaden wrote about in his books, The Circle's Effect and Its Mysteries. There were in the earlier times really strange causes of these circles, including ball lightning, plasma vortices, UFO propulsion systems, as in the Tully saucer nests in Australia in the 60s. And even witnesses I talked to in the US, which, was the basis for another book, Black Swan Ghosts, where
All
they had,
right.
yeah, yeah, I talked to people that had seen UFOs flatten meadows, not literally make a crop circle, and this was in Usk, Washington in the 70s. I mean, this witness, Louise Voves, told me she saw one flatten the meadow as it left before the military came up and sealed the area off, which was sealed. The area was sealed off for over a week. They couldn't pick huckleberries as they were intending to do, all from this UFO. But I asked her, and tell me what this sounds like. I said, Louise, how flat are we talking about? She goes, flat as a pancake, 90 degrees.
Oh
So
my
that
God.
sounded to me like the type that people saw in the Tully saucer nest and other circles over the years. Now, as the decades went on, more and more groups were involved in making them, but they weren't the cause, in my view, of the original phenomena from maybe 70s earlier. Those are quite anomalous, I think, still to this day. But people did start making them. But what we found was all of those circles, whether they were man-made or not, had very strange electromagnetic effects, almost as if something was teaching humans how to create these non-ordinary electromagnetic fields, like non-Maxwellian electromagnetic fields from spiral shapes. It was almost like a
Yeah.
university in spiral vorticity and how to create fractal electromagnetic shapes, which is an important component of ball lightning. So it's interesting that ball lightning might make some of them. But then even if you and I went out and we would, tell people we're making this as an experiment later
Yeah.
on in those years, around 2000 up to the present, you would still get that vortical shape would create very strange electrostatic effects. And I talked to a lot of farmers, Bob, and none of them said to me that they ever had weird electrostatic effects in an ordinary field where the wheat stalks are, what we call wheat here, what you call
Yeah.
corn, standing up straight. But as soon as they're pressed down and swirled around, it would create these very strange electrostatic discharges, which were strong enough to destroy equipment.
Do
Very
you,
strong charges.
Simeon,
Yeah.
when you're doing about talking about these, after, you know, when it were all gone, and I say, if they mowed the field again, did the crops grow again in that field?
Yes, they would grow again. They might look a little odd. I did go back to that Devil's Den formation near Fifield Down, if anyone remembers that one from '99. That circle affected 3 devices in the span of less than half an hour that I saw, a camcorder and my static meter and a GPS device. And those videos of that are on my YouTube channel if people wanna look. I have a playlist for weird crop circle effects, crop circle weirdness. I went back to that circle, Bob, in October of that year, '99, just to check the area out after it had been harvested. Just because someone had suggested to me, maybe, Simeon, it's not the circle, it's in the area, there are dolmens there, and maybe underground springs that are created the
Yeah,
static charges. Reasonable counter argument. So the only way was to go back there. I went back in October. Once the crop had been harvested, there were no more static effects. You could see the ghost image of the circle. I'll try to find it here before the interview is over. Because when people walk on the seeds and they've been pressed down, it pushes them down into the ground and they regrow before the farmer has planted again with new seeds. So you get this ghost circle showing up, which is kind of interesting in and of itself. But they do grow back in that area because of that and for other reasons. People they're replanted again, but you don't find those energies again. In my experience, once it's been harvested, it's something about that pattern of standing stalks, swirled, vortex
yeah.
shaped, chiral patterns, as it's called in condensed matter physics.
Tell us a little bit about ball lightning. What is ball lightning?
Oh, just to answer one of your questions here, I am not Canadian. I'm coming to you from Boulder, Colorado. So that's where my home base is, at least. Yeah.
Right, yeah,
Ball lightning are these free floating fireballs that have been observed for hundreds of years and are also extremely strange. And I've seen ball lightning in and around the Wiltshire area. I haven't seen it. I don't think I've seen it in the US, but different researchers have been studying it for, since the 1700s. Professor Richmond uh, was actually apparently killed by ball lightning doing this experiment uh, with ball lightning in 1753, and you had Francois Arago studying it in France from the early 1800s. And more importantly, more recently, it's been reproduced in the laboratory all around the world. And it's a type of matter, Bob, that is beyond the ordinary states of matter we're used to. It's one step past plasmas. Plasmas, which are by far the most abundant type of matter in the universe. You see them in the aurora borealis and in nebulas and in these galactic uh, luminous objects way out in space. These ionized gases, they don't have any structure to them. Fluorescent light bulbs are a type of plasma.
right,
So you get these lightning as a type of plasma, but when they become uh, condensed into a spherical or uh, toroid shaped form from their own intrinsic containment fields, they become a fifth state of matter called ball lightning. And whilst they're seen 70% of the time uh, around thunderstorms, sometimes they appear in blue skies, open areas, and they behave in very strange ways that also create very strange electromagnetic effects. The ability to vaporize metal, like people's necklaces and rings and things, will disappear around ball lightning. Sometimes ball lightning is completely harmless, but other times it can be dangerous. And when it ends its life, which could be a few seconds to a few minutes, it can explode in a tremendous way, equivalent to something like a grapefruit sized ball lightning could have the power of like 10 hand grenades, be very lethal. Occasionally, people are wounded or killed by ball lightning. I recently gave a presentation in Alamosa, Colorado, the Snippy 24 conference about animal mutilations, animal deaths. and I presented the research that ball lightning can be responsible for some of these mutilations and deaths. It instantaneously uh, boils liquids, including blood, exsanguination, and it can cause instantaneous, very rapid injuries that you won't see necessarily even on the outside, but they can damage living tissue. So ball lightning is important because in paranormal phenomena, Bob, as you're aware, you get a lot of orbs. And I believe orbs and ball lightning are part of this overall class of coherent matter phenomena.
Right.
Matter becomes self-organized and it takes on its own properties and it's self-perpetuating, as we've often heard around what's been called cold fusion, low energy nuclear reaction. But to my surprise, and this was the biggest shock of my life, I started talking to Bigfoot witnesses in Colorado, and they told me they had seen Bigfoot around ball lightning, orbs. Sometimes they only saw the orbs and didn't see Bigfoot in an area where they heard the howls and the screaming sounds. So where you find cryptids, including the dogman that we were talking about before the show started, these so-called werewolf dogman type creatures, and Bigfoot, you often get these luminous anomalies, and you get them around crop circles, and you get orbs, ball lightning around UFOs. You also find them around haunted sites. So it seems, Bob, wherever many types of paranormal, what are called paranormal phenomena, have orbs associated with them. So this type of structured plasma, I think the general family of scientific classification will be called coherent matter, where the matter starts to have the same frequency and the same temperature, kind of the waves reinforce each other. Acoustic cavitation. It's a very important part of condensed matter physics that overlaps with paranormal phenomena.
Yeah, I know we briefly talked about you can be at Bempton where we are, and you can charge your cameras up and everything, and all of a sudden you're ready to film something, and they've gone. It's gone.
Yeah, yeah,
It just drains your cameras and everything. And people say, well, "I've only just charged up, got in car, came here, and it's gone."
right, right. Yeah,
And then
exactly. That
later on, hey, and then later on, it's come back again.
right, right.
How does
No,
that
that's
happen?
absolutely right. And we found that around this is the formation I was referring to before, the Devil's Den, Fifield Down formation. I yeah,
Right.
so that is the one of the phenomena, Bob, around paranormal phenomena of losing batteries. This is just a GPS device if someone came in that formation.
Yeah.
And I was videotaping. My camera still worked, but the person next to me, a Japanese crop circle researcher, Masamaki, his video camera had stopped working. And I recorded this fellow, Rob Spate and his friend come in and their brand new batteries, GPS device with new batteries, completely drained in seconds. So I have seen this with my own eyes. And it seems to be
Hey,
part and
Simeon, do
parcel
you
of the
think
paranormal experience of people. I saw someone here in the comment section wrote that ball lightning came down someone's chimney, their grandmother's
Chimley?
chimney, blew up their kitchen. Yeah, this is what's so interesting about it. I've talked to a lot of ball lightning witnesses, and sometimes it seems like it's walking towards you very slowly, just coming in your direction, trundling along a path like it's intelligent or something. And then it can explode from apparently from this coulombic repulsion. So this is the thing that's important about ball lightning and the battery draining effect, Bob. You and
When you
I
were
and everyone listening right now and watching, we've all been taught about how like charges repel. Like similar elect charges, they're both negative, they repel. Similar, poles on a magnet, what is it called? Repulsion. We're familiar with this idea of electromagnetic repulsion, but
right,
the forces that hold ball lightning together are at least 40 times stronger than that electromagnetic repulsion. So they create an electromagnetic attraction at a very close scale. And the Japanese ball lightning, nuclear physicist trained researcher Takeaki Matsumoto in Japan called it an itonic cluster, and Ken Shoulders called it, you know, a charge cluster, exotic vacuum objects. So these objects are more attracted, the particles, than they are repulsed. So while that attraction is going on, you have this very condensed, highly energetic, free floating fireball, what we call ball lightning, and it's floating around the room. It can be charge neutral, so it can go through physical objects. It can pass through a wall. It can go through glass. Sometimes when it goes through glass, it leaves perfectly circular holes, as you're aware,
Right.
that are slightly melted, even though ball lightning to the touch is cool. It is at room temperature, but it can melt metal at room temperature. Uh, and so this is the thing about it. When the forces holding the ball lightning together, if they start to weaken, the Coulombic repulsion will take over and it'll just blow apart because these particles have been too close together for comfort. And the opposite will happen. So it's a very interesting phenomena, and it's just it fascinates me that it's closely connected to Bigfoot, to other cryptids. You can read about UFO reports of these orbs coming out of these UFOs. Sometimes they stall car engines. You've heard about this. We have
Yeah.
cases like this still in the US. The researcher Stan Gordon just posted this on his site, stangordon.info. I mean, I'm in contact with him, so he sent me these emails. Couple cars on a Pennsylvania turnpike, both cars stalling just a couple of weeks ago. I think it was in July from a kind of tic tac shaped object coming over the highway, kind of like a, a, a cigar shaped or tic tac shaped object.
Yeah. Just,
So, I
uh,
mean, it's just fascinating. It
there's,
stalls engines, it wipes out your batteries. You would think, Bob, that mainstream science would be interested in this. I know Ford Motor Company did
yeah,
a
you would.
study of
You'd think so,
stalled
wouldn't
cars.
you?
You would. There's a surprising lack of information, even in places like, I mean, I have been reading this magazine for over 30 years, Science Magazine, the preeminent
Science.
science, weekly science magazine in the US. You have Nature in the UK. I don't read about these sort of topics very often, but it was enough for Ford Motor Company to put out a paper in the 70s about UFOs and stalled cars. And now we're scheduled to have hearings on November 13th. We will see if they happen post election. A joint Senate House uh, meeting, hearing, I think, about UAP UFOs again. So this topic is not going away. And I mean, you can see the viewers here have had their own experiences. Right here, we're
Yeah.
watching one from og.uk. Her phone batteries died. Yeah. So this is what amazes us. And I've seen this happen myself. And you would think this would be an important scientific topic because if you can create structures that drain batteries, how about structures that charge batteries? I mean, if we complete the loop, Bob, we're talking about a self-sustaining energy process here. And this is what's got a lot of researchers interested in this subject in the Soviet Union, Russia. Many other countries have been looking into this privately now, private companies, about how to create self-sustaining systems. We've called it cold fusion in the past. But here's the big take-home message that people need to remember. How paranormal crosses over into some practicality here in terms of energy is cold fusion Leonard is micro ball lightning, and many cold fusion, and I'm not talking big fusion projects, hot fusion, the type they do at CERN and other eh, eh, large facilities here in the US. That's big toroidal shaped magnets containing a tiny little fusion reaction for a trillionth of a second. We're not talking about the stuff for a trillionth second. We're talking about sustained
No.
ball lightning people can see what goes on in the lab. I mean, the researcher I am Shek Paranov and others, many other Russian researchers have discovered they could reproduce ball lightning in the lab. And from the spectral analysis of that lab produced ball lightning, David Boutillier in Canada and others, Proton 21 Labs out of Kiev, Ukraine, which was bought by DOE, the spectral analysis of that lab produced ball lightning is the same as naturally produced ball lightning and the same as you find over Earth lights, Bob. I'm talking Hesdal in Norway. So it is the same sort of thing. It produced in the lab or produced in nature, and it really has very important consequences. One more thing is that there is a inverse type of ball lightning called black ball lightning, which looks like a solid black shape or is invisible. Go figure. And there are pictures of those too. They completely absorb light, or you might not even see them. They might be
Right.
invisible. You could only, detect them with like an oscilloscope or some sort of magnetometer or something. So it's a very interesting phenomenon. I'm glad you brought it up. That just straddles between ordinary reality and paranormal reality of this ball lightning, which seems to show up in both of these worlds, and is still something we're learning about how to sustain it, how to turn it into perhaps an energy source or whatever it turns out to be. What is the implications for us? But one more thing about 1 out of 20 people in the US, according to this Air Force funded study from 95 by J. Reese Roth, um, 1 out of 20 people in the US have seen ball lightning. So this is on the order of the number of people that have seen UFOs and so forth. So people have seen it, but people don't know what it is. And it isn't even accepted in science. There are journals in the US that banned any mention of ball lightning. Fusion Technology Magazine and others would censor researchers who wanted to talk about ball lightning. So it's an important subject, but for some reason, it has not received a lot of attention.
Right. Yeah. Strange is that. What made you write the dark matter monsters then? Was that about? Tell us a little bit about your research into Bigfoot. I think you froze.
You've been struck by ball lightning here. You disappeared for a second there, Bob. We had a little ball lightning glitch.
Right. Right.
Go ahead. Go ahead again.
Um, Tell us about why you wrote Dark Matters Monsters. And I know we talked
Yeah.
a little bit before the program about Bigfoot. What research have you done into it?
Bigfoot and cryptids are one of the most fascinating subjects I have ever encountered in my life, on par with remote viewing, crop circles, and UFOs. And I'll tell you how it started. I Going back to my childhood again, I did see the Patterson Gimlin film. People have seen that frame of from Patterson and Gimlin's footage from Patty, um, which I happened to see in people have seen this frame before, right?
Yes,
Patterson
yeah,
Gimlin.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I saw that as a preview to a movie in the 70s, and I wasn't sure what it was. And over the years, I really didn't focus much on it, but I thought, as I had heard on overnight talk radio shows, that this was some sort of rare relic primate, like an ape, like a relic ape. There was a researcher at the university I went to for sociology, where I taught later, WSU in Pullman, Grover Krantz, who believed it could have been Gigantopithecus, a a giant ape that went extinct 20 million years ago in China, and all they ever found of it was a jawbone. They reconstructed the size of Gigantopithecus, this big ape that walked on 4 legs. And over the years, thought it could be maybe those animals still existed, rare, in the northwest of the US. That is not what Bigfoot turned out to be, but it's what I believed until I started listening to my remote viewing students, many of whom, I had the classes in Boulder, Colorado for decades. People would come for a 3-day weekend. And some of the students were from local areas, Fort Collins, Greeley area in Colorado, Colorado Springs. And they would tell me of their Bigfoot encounters, Bob, in the Rocky Mountains. And I started paying attention to this. I heard lectures, usually at all the UFO conferences, Bob, in the US. And I started going to those in like 96. You might have one Bigfoot presentation, which I could never figure out why Bigfoot was in a UFO conference. But there would be one researcher, and I'd go and listen, and they would talk about Bigfoot turning invisible and Native American experience with Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the Yowie, as it's called in Australia, many
Yeah.
different names for it. And as I began to do more research, I eventually realized it was not a relic primate, because I heard too many stories of telepathic contact with Sasquatch, invisibility of Sasquatch to turn invisible, um, and I started going to conferences like I had with UFOs, and I was really astounded to meet people who had would share their stories with me who had never talked to anyone before. Fascinating. And these were very strange encounters, not at all like you would expect from an ordinary primate. We're part of the primate family too. Well, on the human side of the primate family. But it didn't fit any of the ideas of it being anything like an ape apart from general facial appearance because they walk on 2 legs, you know,
That's
they
right.
can speak, they have their own language as we learned from the Sierra Sounds, Ron Moorhead, in the
Yeah,
'70s.
Ron.
And there's a movie coming out about it. I happen to be part of this movie, Paranormal Bigfoot, Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot. I had seen the first version of Flash of Beauty, and they came out with a sequel. And the producers of that told me they had to do the sequel because so many of their witnesses in the first movie talked about these strange paranormal like experiences around Sasquatch, including like a brain fog, missing time, um, seeing the Bigfoot morph into a tree stump or a bush or come out of a tree stump or a bush, very strange things. And then you had the cases of battery and camera failure. That's what really got me to pay attention to this. The very
Right.
first conference I went to, hosted by the Bailey Sasquatch Outpost in Bailey, Colorado, which was about an hour and a half from Boulder. So I could go to this museum, and I stopped by it once and was amazed to see this map of sightings. I didn't know they were so close to urban areas, right down in the Rockies there, Denver, Boulder area. But when I went to the first conference, there were witnesses there I just happened to speak to. And it's always amazing, Bob, when you're at a conference and you're just sitting down to have a cup of coffee or something or a snack, and you just start talking to people next to you and they've had experiences that are really interesting. And these witnesses I talked to, I had read their report on BFRO.net, Bigfoot Researchers Organization. But here they were sitting right next to me from an area near Estes Park, and they talked about how they had gone to look at a friend's summer cabin just to make sure it was okay during the winter, and they heard what they thought were like kids playing behind. We're back. Yes. So
Yeah, we're back.
they talked about going to investigate these sounds of children playing, which they what's going on behind our friend's cabin. The the wife goes back 100 feet behind the cabin and becomes completely disoriented. There are no kids there, but she feels a strange sort of confusion come over her, and then her phone stops working, and she photographs what she believes to be a Sasquatch in the bushes. She said that she saw them, and she said she could only get back to her husband and the car because he was hitting rocks together. She was so confused she couldn't even find her way back 100 feet
Oh
to
my
the
God.
driveway. And this was not isolated stories. When we do science, and I come from a social science tradition, you want a lot of cases to build your sense of reality around to construct a theory or something, not one case. So I began to go to more conferences, and I just began hearing the same sorts of stories: brain fog, battery failure, car stalling, similar things around crop circles and UFOs. Uh, Sometimes the phones would take a charge again, sometimes they didn't work for a while. Photographs that people took of these creatures. And as I began to research it, I realized that this was a huge hidden event. Hidden events in sociology are topics, phenomena people are experiencing, but they don't want to talk about. You and I were talking about this before the show, because of fear of ostracism and ridicule from your neighbors and your family laughing at you, right? Ah ha ha. You saw a Sasquatch, it was probably a bear, as people are often told. The similarities, Bob, between these stories, starting with my students in RV class 20 years ago, just mentioning their experiences, to what I read was the exact same thing. People camping, having their tents picked up with 2 people in it, carried off a distance, being pulled out of their sleeping tents by the sleeping bags, huge creatures. Here's one component that's really fascinating: the sounds that people hear Bigfoot make. Some people say it's the loudest sounds they've ever heard in their life. It makes your ears ring. It's like
Mm.
being next to a freight train. And yet someone 100 feet away in the other part of the campground won't hear it. Directional sound. You were talking about coherent matter before, ball lightning. This is like the sound version of ball lightning. It's directional and it's coherent like a laser. Sounds just going in one direction, but extremely loud. And the similarities are so amazing. Like, for instance, when people get these telepathic contacts with Bigfoot where they don't see it, but they see it in their mind's eye, kind of like remote viewing. But then they'll open the door, something to look down there they are. But they got the contact with him before they had physical senses make contact
Do
with
you
him.
think you can do it through consciousness then?
Something like that, Bob. They have the ability to project their mental intention into your mind. I mean, those Sasquatch are smart enough and sneaky enough to get people to like open their doors of their houses and walk out, things like this. Um, they people have dreams about them, uh, who've never had dreams about Sasquatch before, just a couple days before having contact. So it really does suggest um, an innate psychic ability on the part of Sasquatch to interact with us in, you know, something akin to clairvoyance, remote viewing, uh, where it starts to be like this two-way communication. No, Bob, people who've experienced this, like I'll give you an example. Les Stroud of Survivor Man Bigfoot
Oh yeah, Les.
countered. Yeah, that show, you've seen it on YouTube. If you didn't see it on whatever channel he had, that, this outdoor adventurer survivalist, he encountered Sasquatch just making the shows up somewhere up in BC, and made a whole series, Survivor Man Bigfoot. And he talks about being in the Portland area. This is one example, but it's so similar. He heard them in his mind, and he went to see a psychologist afterwards just to make sure he wasn't cracking up. A lot of people do this. They don't understand how you can hear something talking in your mind, but
Yeah,
this is
correct.
common. It sometimes sounds like another type of voice. Sometimes it sounds kind of computerized, but they'll say something like, "Don't bother to get your gun. It won't do any good against us. It won't do anything against us." If someone's walking into the closet to get their shotgun, they'll hear that voice in their head. The Sasquatch seem to know what they're doing. And people feel highly disturbed by this, people who've never experienced it before. So it's a very multifaceted topic. The other component that makes it interesting, Bob, is here in the US, you had hundreds of Native American tribes that have names for Sasquatch, and many of them said they had trading relations with Sasquatch. Some recently, one Native American I met at the Forks, Washington, Forks Bigfoot Conference on the Olympic Peninsula, Washington State, on the Pacific. He got up and said his grandfather traded with Sasquatch as recently as 1913, salmon for
Oh my
medicinal.
God.
So that doesn't really sound like an animal, does it? I've never had animals in the forest kind of trade with you. I mean, they don't do that on a regular basis. But you had many Northwest American tribes, native tribes, saying this. So they're intelligent enough to trade with humans. And my feeling about them is they're a type of ancient human with paranormal abilities, similar to what the Russian hominologist concluded, Igor Burtsev and others. They thought initially they were some rare ape, but then the abilities of this creature are too widespread. So they realized it was a type of human with paranormal ability. So it seems to be something related to us way back that we haven't discovered yet officially, that exists all over the world and is very good at either hiding or creating invisibility. I've spoken to witnesses who've told me they've seen it go invisible in front of their eyes into these sparkly pixels of light, and it's gone like a
Yeah.
light comes down. And you've heard this too, and it's other, whether Bigfoot's a cryptid or a type of very ancient human with special abilities. The other cryptids seem to do this also, including the werewolf, dogman types, and others, where they just seem to disappear. Another strange aspect of it, Bob, they seem to move around, but not continuously in your field of view, like a cartoon character. They seem to go from here to here to here. You go down the trail to try to get away from them, and there
Yeah,
they
they
are.
do.
Go figure. It's extremely strange
What?
topic. It has
So,
not received enough attention from
when
academics, and the academics who have studied it think it's Gigantopithecus. I don't think it's
do you
Gigantopithecus. So
do you think the government know about these Sasquatch then?
yeah, I do, Bob. And okay, we're back.
We're
Uh,
back again.
yeah. So your question was, does the government know about it? Definitely.
Yeah,
I remember coming across a report here from the Army Corps of Engineers, which created these dams in the Northwest along the Columbia and Snake Rivers for hydroelectricity. And in this report from the 80s, they had a chapter on Bigfoot. Okay. Sometimes before you do a big project, you have to do an environmental and social impact statement. It's something I'm
right.
familiar with from sociology, and it's common in this area where there are large government funded projects. You have to do a social impact statement, environmental impact statement. In one of those impact statements, they talked about Bigfoot quite openly in this 80s vintage era report, Army Corps of Engineers. I have seen forms that are called Bigfoot reporting forms. One was from the Hood River National Forest uh, administration, from someone that worked for them and photographed the form they found on a table one day. And I've heard reports from National Park Service and National Forest Service workers. I've read stories from them encountering Sasquatch way out in the deep parts of national parks, Yellowstone, Glacier, and being told by their supervisors, we don't talk about that sort of thing here. Don't talk about it. There's censorship going on. So the government knows about it, not to mention the big military bases we have in the US where you hear reports of Sasquatch on those military bases from people that may have been gone out to deal with them or something. Reports of people being asked to be snipers to remove these Sasquatch from the military bases. I think it's an important subject. I have a petition on change.org/protect Bigfoot, just because, yeah, it's pretty clear, just like UFOs, Bob, our governments know about these creatures and we're not being told anything about them. And when people like Park Service workers encounter them, they're told what you saw was a bear. And if it's a dog man or werewolf type, they're told what you saw was a pack of dogs and you're just suffering from PTSD.
Exactly.
So total denial, even though these people know that none of those dogs, wild dogs are rare, do not walk on two legs for extended periods of time. It's ridiculous. They don't leave footprints. We have a lot of footprints evidence. Even the researchers, people like John Bindernagel in Canada or Grover Krantz, Jeff Meldrum, I mean, they say, look, the evidence that these creatures exist is clear from footprints, hair samples, so forth, that they leave on barbed wire fences. There is physical evidence of these creatures, the occasional scat they leave
And
behind.
they've probably done DNA tests, haven't they?
They've done DNA tests, and it usually comes back, from my knowledge, of mostly human, 8% something unidentified. It's not there. The DNA from Sasquatch is not in any official database that we know about as a recognized animal. So here's the thing, Bob. For all our listeners and viewers here, we live in this age where we think that anything that existed has to be online somewhere, right? All these search engines, we have AI scanning the internet, even books are read into AI. We would think anything that exists, I should be able to find information about it. And yet, Sasquatch, even with the preponderance of satellites out there and drones, we don't have a lot of good photos. There are good photos out there. One of them was taken nearby here by a Forest Service worker, and in the 80s, the Paul Freeman footage. Um, you can find footage which to me looks legit, but you don't have a huge amount of it from something that exists physically like we do, which is why my conclusion is they're made of another type of matter, dark matter. I mean, this is the research from ball lightning, plasma vortices and so forth, is those types of energy systems interact with dark matter, relic neutrinos, and so forth, types of particles that are not easy to detect electromagnetically, but do interact, with things like toroidal moments and then the consequences of vortex type shapes. It seems to me the logical consequence, Bob, is there could be life forms that are also more dark matter based than ordinary matter like us. And you would expect the characteristics of dark matter life forms to have properties that we just don't see in ordinary matter, like ability to cloak, become invisible, be associated with ball lightning, as these toroidal moments are, even on a microscopic scale. So, in my mind, and the researcher Ken Shoulders, who worked at SRI, Stanford Research Institute, for the government originally, NSA with microelectronic masking techniques and so forth. When he discovered these micro ball lightning that he called EVOs, exotic vacuum objects in comparison to ordinary matter, he even
Yeah.
suggested there are life forms most likely built around ball lightning that would persist, that would have abilities we don't have. And hence why I call them dark matter monsters. Is I believe they're based on another type of matter, which is why they're associated with luminosities. They can make sounds. We have a comment here from og.uk about the wood knocks. Is that part of their language or actual tree knocks? It's an excellent question because we really don't know. It sounds like tree knocking, but no one's actually seen them sitting there hitting trees with their fists. Some people
Exactly.
think they
Well,
might
they
make it
haven't.
by clapping or with their vocal cords. According to Scott Nelson, they have a double set of vocal cords. The Navy cryptologist that examined the Sierra sounds with Ron Moorhead. And Ron wrote about that in his book, uh, Quantum Bigfoot, and his other books. So Scott Nelson concluded they have a language. If you listen to the recordings of them, we don't know what they're saying, but there's syllables there. It sounds like an Asiatic language,
Right.
and it raises the question: the sounds that. So here's one more thing about Bigfoot, Bob. That's really strange. They seem to be able to reproduce any sound they ever heard, as one researcher said. Um, uh, it's like they have a hard disk in their chest. It's just recording sounds, and then they can reproduce it because they can sound like you calling for your dog. People have heard
Right.
them. Yeah, it's the creepiest thing, and people have heard them sounding like their dad calling for them. And so, Og's question is because I know people have heard these wood knocks and that other sound they make, like a tractor going through the forest. Oh, everything.
I
But
tell
you
you,
go back the next day and there's nothing.
when you're
You would
saying
expect
that as well, I'd heard
tornado
somebody
trail
say,
of damage, and there's nothing there. So, are
I
they
can
capable of making these sounds? So, Og, it's a good question.
sounds,
We don't
yeah.
really know the.
Somebody said when they were out, they could hear a child making noises and laughing.
Okay, so they can. I had that case from Colorado, down from Estes Park, where the people thought there were children playing. And is it juvenile Sasquatch, or are they tricking you to come deeper into the forest? Because I've read about cases, and this is from Rusty Wilson's excellent books that he collects from his. Rusty Wilson has written a lot of books about this. You can find them as a fly fishing guide. He's collected stories from his tour guests. And one story, the guy said it sounded like a cow, injured cow in distress. So he went into the forest from a rest stop, not far from Grand Junction, Colorado, up in the hills there. And he got completely lost. There was no cow. And someone who'd spent his whole life in the woods all of a sudden he didn't even know where he was, which is
Oh
very
God.
common. Again, they draw you in with a sound of a child or an animal in distress, and then they scramble your mind somehow, and all of a sudden you don't know where you are. I've come across these stories multiple times of people experienced in backpacking or forestry or something, and you don't know where you are, and you get lost. You lose your sense of direction. So you have to be careful with the sounds out there because sometimes it's the Sasquatch tricking you to go deeper into the forest, and you'll lose your way. Even just a few miles from the national park headquarters or something. You won't know where you are. I haven't experienced this, but this is what people say they've experienced out there. So, yeah, good question, and the
When we're
sound
talking
they make
about when we're
voices are
talking
built that's
about dark
cardboard stuff.
matter
Yeah, go ahead.
and things like that, what do you think ghosts are then?
To me, ghosts are related to ball lightning in the sense more on the lines of the invisible realm, and they seem to be part of a parallel reality to ours that we normally don't perceive, and it could be so faint. I mean, there could be ghosts around us all the time, but it's going to be so faint you won't perceive it. And I know this from remote viewing. There's a threshold to our awareness. If the signal is very low in term relationship to the noise in your mind, you won't perceive it below a certain uh, magnitude of the signal. There's like a limit, a threshold below which, and it's called subliminal. Your unconscious will know about it, but you won't consciously see it. Some ghosts seem to inhabit areas, places where they seem to be in a reality that is still there, whether it's like a tape loop playing around that they're not there anymore, but the energy is still there, or they're consciously there. They seem to be related to this phenomena. Just because, Bob, if you look at what people encounter around haunted sites, areas that are known to be haunted, like hotels and sanatoriums and places like this,
Yeah.
hospitals, old hospitals and places that have been around a long time, battlefield sites like Civil War sites here in the US. You get some of the same changes you get around Bigfoot and UFOs, like sudden cold, sudden temperature changes. And another symptom that tells you something's going on, silence. The area, you don't hear anything all of a sudden. There's no crickets chirping, there's no birds chirping. Yeah, you get this around haunted sites too, which lead me to believe it's part of the same family of phenomena. I could be wrong about this, but often in these haunted sites, people say it seems unusually cold. And that is one of the characteristics of a dark matter type state, where more, even as you put more energy into it, it won't increase the heat. It's somehow absorbing the energy into its self organization. Science, physics calls it negative temperatures. These are states of matter that, in contrast to our ordinary states of matter, as you add more energy, it feels hotter. These are the opposite. As you put more energy into it, it feels colder because it creates more organization. The energy is going somewhere else, negative temperature. So ghosts seem to be part of this. Yeah, to me, they start to seem part of a realm of parallel realities, multiverses. It's a whole nother discussion. Physicists have debated about this since the 50s. If this is the easiest way to understand quantum mechanics, is that it suggests multiple realities set up at the same time. And all of us right now would be part of one version of that reality, which is why we're interacting right now. So perhaps spirits and ghosts and things are types of life that are inhabiting another type of reality. But I think the evidence is that they're there, just like it is for these other topics. Again, I think your country might be more open to this. When I've been in the UK and I've talked about crop circles and it maybe went into ghost conversation at some old cathedral or something like this, people didn't seem to be very reluctant to talk about it. But again, it's something that modern science hasn't really looked at very much. And I think it's part of a bigger part of physics that we should be looking at because, I mean, it has impacts on how we might live. We just might find out, Bob, that we live in a universe that's inhabited with lots of other types of life forms. Whether it's
Oh, yeah.
socially acceptable or popular to talk about this is a whole other question. But these phenomena exist, and the way you know they exist is the witnesses. It's the reports have so many common characteristics over and over again. Bigfoot from West Coast to East Coast. I mean, in doing my research about Bigfoot, I found they're in every state in the country. Even Hawaii people have said they've encountered them everywhere. They're in your country if you read the reports. They're in
Oh,
Europe.
yeah.
Uh, in China, they call them the Yeren. They have names everywhere you go. And that to me is a type of evidence, the consistency of the reports. It's not as some psychologists that I've read have suggested. Well, the reason the reports are so consistent is it's being generated by a part of your brain. We all have the same brains as modern humans, so it's generating the same uh, illusion, the same hallucination. No, no way. That it is just a easy way to cop out of the argument.
Course it is, yeah.
The other way to look at it is it's so consistent because there's something really there. Just like you get consistency when you look at giraffes. Their same sort of giraffe is there, right? And the same type of fish. Well, you get the same thing with the same type of Bigfoots, which is why you get the same type of footprints, which are really large. I've seen these. I've been at some places where we practiced making casts. Big footprints, have the same features, anatomical features, many different parts of the US across the world. So that suggests it's a physical reality. The big mystery for us, which goes back into ghosts, and some researchers, Bob, have suggested that Bigfoot is like a type of ghost in some ways because, I mean, they can disappear really quickly. And why don't we pick them up more easily? If they're really out there all the time, how come you don't see satellite images of
Hmm.
them and stuff? They there's a crossover into the ghostly realm of phenomena. I don't mean it shouldn't mean we run away from it and say, "Oh, we can't study it anymore." It's this coherent matter family of phenomena
Do you
that
think
have this
the
ability to change and morph. It's been
I'm
written
gonna
about by
say, do you
defense
think they're
contractors.
interdimensional then?
What's that?
Do you think they're interdimensional?
Yes, I do. I think they can go to frequencies that you and I can't consciously go to, which is why, and I've spoken to the people who've seen this. Bob Moorhead wrote about it. Ron Moorhead in Voices in the Wilderness at the Sierra Camp. You know, I've interviewed him a couple times on my YouTube channel. I encourage people to go to my YouTube channel. Just look for Fractal Friend or my name, Simeon Hine. You'll find my YouTube channel. I've interviewed Bob on Ron Moorhead. Uh, the most amazing thing that sticks with me from interviewing him, which he wrote about in his books, is that you would never see the Sasquatch, but you would hear them. And from the sounds, they should be like only 30 feet away from you or next to the hunting structure.
Hmm.
They should be close by. They should have cast shadows. You could hear them talking, arguing outside the hunting structure they're in. I mean, this is what he wrote, and it's coming up in this newer film, the third Flashy Beauty film about the Sierra Camp from the 70s, which should have been preserved as a historical structure rather than taken down as the National Forest Service did, even if it wasn't a legal structure to build out there. It was 8 miles up. You had to get there by horseback. And the Johnson brothers had been encountering these Sasquatch since the 50s. Ron didn't encounter it till the 70s when he went up. And then he had 9 visits up there. He said you wouldn't see them, Bob, but you would hear them, and from their conversations and talking, you would think they were only 10 feet away. Sometimes he said it sounded like it was coming from a tree. Now, I know to people, doesn't that sound strange, like the Sasquatch is coming in and out of a
Yeah,
tree? But
it
I've
does.
spoken to people personally who've said they've seen this, who haven't shared their stories very much with people, and they've people I've come across, remote viewing students, again, recently, Bob, this year, an RV student who just said, "By the way, I had this experience I thought I'd share with you." I said, "Go ahead." Calabasas, California, outside of LA. She encountered one that went into a tree, and she didn't even believe in Bigfoot. So
Oh God.
they have these incredible abilities, I think, to morph and change. So yeah, Bob, to answer your question, to me, yeah, it seems like interdimensional. I think that's a good word for it. Yeah.
Before we go, what do you think shadow people are?
Well, it's a really good question, and my research into different types of cryptids and Bigfoot and leads me to believe there are a lot of life forms around us, types. I'm not saying that they're common like ordinary life forms. They may be rare, but they do exist and people encounter them, all types. There's another type of Bigfoot type creature that's small that the Native Americans call Littlefoot or little people, the Bugwas, as the coast Indians called them. That's another type of 2 to 3 foot high creature that they said existed, and you can talk to people that have encountered these. But the shadow people seem to be a variant, and I don't pretend to know the full cosmology of these life forms. I'm just going to say, I think the evidence suggests there are other types of life forms next to us, closer than you might think, that inhabit forests, desert areas, ocean, beach areas, even suburbs. Rarely do you see them in urban areas, but there are reports of them too on rooftops and so forth. And I know someone that encountered one of these in uh, north part of Manhattan Island, New York City. She still to this day can't identify what she saw, but it was sort of in a Bigfoot like direction, like a very hairy type of tall human. But the one thing she noticed, all the sounds went away. All of a sudden, she couldn't see anyone else. She couldn't. There was no one there, but she could see the streets, but it like was frozen. I think the shadow people are just another type of life on this spectrum. In analogy to black ball lightning, invisible lightning, there's invisible types of life forms, creatures too. Um, and people say they encounter them, men in black and so forth. I think I think all of us who are listening to this broadcast right now, we're going to be in a time where this information becomes more apparent. It may have taken hundreds of years for us to get her to even be talking about it without thinking we're dealing with witchcraft. I mean, in the past, Bob, if we had had this discussion, we could have been burned at the stake
Oh,
in your
yeah,
country and my,
probably.
yeah, right. So there was a reason people didn't talk about this, but we don't live in that time period anymore. We have the internet. We're talking about it right now. We're not, no one's interfering with us. There are other types of life forms, Bigfoot being the tip of the iceberg, Bigfoot being a very big tip of the iceberg. But all of these types of creatures, the reports are so consistent. Let's talk about others even besides dogman werewolves, which you were talking about in the northeast part of your country.
Yeah.
Like, and I've spoken to other people from the UK, have talked about friends seeing these creatures right outside their rural homes and so forth. There's also in the US we have thunderbirds, which are type of pterodactyl, huge 10, 12-foot wingspan type bird that people see shouldn't exist anymore, prehistoric dinosaur, but I mean, they are seen from Pennsylvania. Stan Gordon again has reports of these even recently, all the way to California. So that's another type of cryptid. You wonder, where do they live? Where do they families? Do they reproduce? Where do they hatch their young? We don't know the answers to these questions, which is why I think they're a type of shadow life form. McDonnell Douglas had an advert recently, one of our defense contractors, they called it the shadow biome. So, yeah, they may know a little more than we do. Is it just clever advertising, or is that what we're talking about? Dark matter life forms, parallel realities. I think it just all makes sense. And not only does it make sense, I think we have enough witness reports over many decades that that's what people are seeing. And it would explain why they disappear so quickly. Sometimes you don't know where they went. Many of these Bigfoot witnesses say to me, we were looking at it and it was just gone. And I asked them, did it turn and walk away? They go, I don't know. It just wasn't there anymore. So I think we should keep our minds open to it, all these possibilities. I mean, modern academics, which I used to be part of, I publish papers and peer reviewed journals, all this. They don't want to touch these topics. They're too afraid of what you were saying at the beginning of the show, Bob, the ridicule, the ostracism. And it's unfortunate because the public is experiencing this. The official reality isn't talking about it. And I think it leads to election outcomes like we saw last night here in the US, where people are kind of fed up with the system. They don't trust it anymore. You almost can't blame them. Uh, I didn't vote for Trump, but I can understand why people would, because they have experiences and no one's talking about it. And they just begin to lose faith in the official system we have. That's my interpretation as a
Yeah.
sociologist. And honestly, Trump has talked about UFOs, and Joe Rogan interview recently mentioned it. We didn't hear much about that from Biden Harris. So uh, people don't trust the system as much. And that's one reason why, and I don't blame them. They have UFO sightings, they have cryptid sightings. They're scared to go out in the woods. Just to wrap this up, Bob, people I know who've encountered Bigfoot often stay out of the woods for a long time. People that are used to grew up hiking, camping, and fishing and hunting, they won't go out there anymore. It's that scary. It's called PTSD. And I think it's unfortunate we still live in a time when people have experiences that they don't feel comfortable talking about. But I think it's changing
Okay.
thanks to shows like yours and other
Maybe.
podcasts that people are talking about this, our audience, uh, that uh, we're talking about this more. We're realizing many of us have had these experiences. In the first Flash of Beauty film, and I'll just sum it up what we're saying here. The first Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot revealed, they had psychological professionals saying you won't even remember your encounters, which I've talked to people, this has happened to them. They have a missing time from their hike. Your brain has such strong defense mechanisms. It's not just your neighbors and your family and your friends who you're afraid of. Maybe they'll think I'm weird if I share the story. They'll laugh at me. Your brain will delete it uh, the same day. I read about a dogman case recently, Ontario. The woman, her partner saw it in the car behind her. She had forgotten it by the time she got home, but once he started talking about it again,
It came
pretty
back.
scary looking dog man they saw on the road right along there as they drove by. He remembered it, but she remembered it when he started talking about it. So we could have had experiences and not remembered it. So I think we have a lot to learn, Bob, and I think it's exciting. And I would say to folks, stick around because it's a whole new universe once we realize that these are different types of life forms. They've been around us the whole time. The giants of the Bible, perhaps, but we're starting to talk about it again.
Thank you for that. Where can people get your books?
Oh, thanks very much. I'm happy to send people signed copies. All my books are on Amazon if people want to go there. And of course, reviews are always appreciated. But I'm happy to send you signed copies. Just go to my blog, newcrystalmind.com, newcrystalmind.com. And I have a link there to get signed copies of these books. Happy to
Oh,
send you
brilliant.
copies. Yeah.
And
And
if
I appreciate everyone's support. People have been extremely kind and helpful and have read my books and given me excellent ideas and said it's been helpful to them. So I really appreciate the audience here and the people who've been involved with my books and my platform. I'm just going to say thank you.
and if people want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
Oh, you can find me on my YouTube channel again, Fractal Friend, Simeon Hine. Either way, you can find it. And on all my websites, I'll just mention New Crystal Mind, but I have several websites for remote viewing, training, and others. There's a contact form. You just hit the contact form and you can send me a message or so forth. I'm also on Twitter, X, and other platforms. So
Brilliant. It's been a fabulous show.
thank you,
Thank
Bob.
you. Thank you for coming on. Everybody in the chat rooms enjoyed it as well.
Yeah,
Was
thank you.
nice. This was a really fascinating. Thanks, brilliant. I really enjoyed listening to Simeon tonight. Thanks for coming on Bob's show.
Thank you.
Great guest. That's from Joanne. Thank you, Bob and Simeon.
Thank you. Thanks for listening and keep the faith and keep studying, keep learning, and we're going to figure this out together.
Yeah. And I'm sure I know a few of them will say, why don't you get him back on in the future? I will do in the new year sometime.
Of course.
Thank you again for coming on the show. It's been absolutely fantastic.
Thank you,
My
Bob.
guest on Friday is Thomas Durant. He's a film and television producer. I think he has something to do with The Deadliest Catch, Ice Road Truckers, Car Trek. He's done loads of different things. He's had some paranormal experiences as well. So that's on Friday at 2 o'clock Eastern, 11 o'clock Pacific, and 7 p.m. in the UK. Steph just said, get Simeon on again. Talk about remote viewing. That's a good subject, that is.
We'll do it sometime. Sure. Good
Yeah,
idea.
we'll do it the new year sometime. I'll get you back on if that's okay with you.
Yes. And just one thing, I do have a remote viewing group that's open to anybody that meets once a month on a Sunday evening. So
What time's that on?
we do that in the evening US time. So it might be like kind of late for UK folks, but if you look around my websites, go to virtualviewing.org, there's a link, and it's just a very inexpensive way for us to get together once a month to
Yeah,
practice, no matter
true.
what
Yeah.
your skill level. So,
Right. Thank you for that. Everybody, take care, and now enjoy your afternoon, Simeon.
You too.
Carry on,
Thanks, Tom.
carry on your good work,
Okay, thank you.
and good night from the UK. Bye for now.
Bye bye.
Bye.